Another nightmare. Why do these keep happening? Huh? Alundra? What are you doing here? Are you trying to help me escape my nightmares? This is fate. This is Alundra, an awesome 2D action RPG for the PlayStation 1 that released in 1998 and was localized by none other than Working Designs. I had this game as a kid and could never beat it because it was just so darn difficult. So my mission when I got a PlayStation 2 a couple years ago was to get this game and finally beat it. And I did pay way too much for this game, but it did come with a cloth. Wait, huh? That must be lunar. A paper map. Still kind of cool, I guess. And yeah, I put this game in my top 10 PS1 RPGs list because I like it so much, even though it's not truly an RPG. There's no leveling up, and there's not really any upgrading of equipment except for a few times in the game. So whether that's correct or incorrect, I'm going to leave that to your discretion, but this is still a great game that anyone who likes old school action RPGs, 2D Zelda-like games, and PlayStation 1 Working Designs classics should absolutely play. Alundra was actually quite well received in 1998, except for, you guessed it, the graphics. Oh, 1998. You just love to rip on anything 2D for being outdated by like 3 years. We get it. 3D is all the rage. 2D games out the window. That said though, Alundra is actually quite a beautiful game. I do really like the character sprites and those little details that are everywhere, like the flowing water, the glimmering fire in the hearths, and the fireflies that flicker at night. All the visual charm that just no polygon at that time could have matched. The graphics are almost timeless. I will also briefly say that the soundtrack is really, well, no, let's not say that. The soundtrack is solid. A handful of the tracks, such as the town music for example, are really, really good and memorable, with some tracks being forgettable, but the thing is the music does mostly fit the mood and the atmosphere. That said though, I don't know if it's just me or not, but I really feel like the sound effects in the game are mixed in way too loudly and can occasionally sound pretty awkward. Let's move on to the story and translation. The story must be mentioned, without spoilers of course, because that's not what I do. While many retro RPGs did have good stories, few of them were as dark, explorative, consistent, and just able to forgo those anime RPG tropes like Alundra. The story's unique, and if anything, it actually had a lot of players complaining that it was a little bit too dark and too depressing. But in my opinion, this is exactly what makes Alundra such a powerful, unique experience. See, the premise of the game is that Alundra has a special ability to enter dreams or nightmares and alter the outcome. The game starts with him being shipwrecked, which leaves him stranded in a village with residents who, you guessed it, get frequent nightmares and even sometimes die to those very same nightmares. Damn it. That's actually pretty tropey. That sounds like some fate coming into play, does it not? Throughout the course of the game, Alundra enters many of the residents' nightmares and has to grapple with some of the villagers, exalting him as a savior, while others brand him as a harbinger of woe. I am really happy to say that while the story does evolve beyond that premise, it doesn't quite devolve into the really abstract weirdness that feels like a bait and switch like many other RPGs. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, play a lot of RPGs from the 80s and 90s where the second half of the game devolves into a convoluted mess about some existential threat you barely know of or wasn't mentioned until like 80% through the game, seeking to destroy the world. And your biggest tools to fight off this threat are love and friendship, because nothing can overcome that. Ugh. Did anyone writing these scripts for these games make it past elementary school or puberty? Let's move on to the gameplay though. Alundra's gameplay will feel very familiar to anyone who has played a 2D Zelda game. You walk around with a weapon, granted no shield in Alundra, with a big world that is relatively open to explore, filled with dungeons and secrets and a hub town. If that's not Zelda-esque, then I don't know what is. Let's start with the exploration, though. Alundra contains a big world, and while you can explore it freely, many areas and secrets require new upgrades and abilities to get to. You do get a few different weapons, which can aid you in exploration. I say that because most of them are obtained automatically. For example, the flail breaks white pillars that can block your path, while the flame wand or fire wand, I forget the exact name, can burn away vines that block your path. There are also additionally upgrades that increase HP and magic, as well as 50 golden falcons, which can be traded to one shopkeeper for various upgrades at certain increments. What I found was that the game really opens up with a few big upgrades. Unlike Zelda, where almost every tool you get can lead to a few new heart pieces and secrets. There's no level ups in Alundra, but there are some optional weapons and armor, including one sword you can get for dying too many times. So, noobs, you're welcome. I won't spoil it here, but needless to say, there is a lot to find, and the world map music is epic. Now, puzzles. Let's move on to that because that's actually probably everyone's favorite aspect of Alundra, I think. Alundra has a lot of dungeons. This is a 30 to 40 hour game for most people, and there's over 20 dungeons to experience, with some being longer and more complex than others. The dungeons are really neat and all feel pretty different. You'll see everything from a church to a giant tree to a water canal to a volcano. And hey, I never said Alundra was striving for realism. In these games you go from like a volcano to like an ice world in 2 seconds. I mean, these were not ecology majors designing these games. Maybe thankfully. The interesting atmospheres are critical since you will actually spend 45 minutes to 3 hours in most of the dungeons. The biggest aspect of the dungeons are puzzles, which can be brutally difficult. Let me just repeat that. They can be brutally difficult. Some puzzles will be familiar to Zelda veterans, such as moving boxes or hitting switches, but many won't be, and most players will need to consult a guide at least a couple times should they wish to keep their sanity. Seriously, Alundra is one of the harder games I have ever played in terms of puzzles and dungeon design, and that is partially because there's no map system at all, so you gotta memorize your way around the dungeon, and there's many puzzles in each dungeon. But, don't despair too much. I found most of them satisfying, and I would say 75% of them are actually pretty solvable to most players with just a little brain power and patience. And if nothing else, they are really clever, well-designed puzzles, even if they can occasionally be maddening. Moving on to the combat. Combat in Alundra is largely what you would expect from a 2D action-adventure game. You have multiple weapons, like a flail, sword, bow and arrow, all of which can charge for a more powerful attack. And you can also use bombs and accessories to augment your combat as well, though they're not quite as dynamic or as used as they are in a Zelda game. Combat in Alundra is typically easier than the puzzles, but players will still need to pay attention to enemy patterns since they tend to do a fair bit of damage, and taking intentional hits in this game, kind of like unlike Zelda where you can kind of get away with that, is not really recommended unless you have a save point near you since you can heal at those. The bosses in Alundra are pretty creative, but they're not really that hard until later in the game. And I found those later bosses to be difficult more because they're HP sponges, and there's not really any way to tell what weapons damage them more. This to me was one of the weakest aspects of the game. Like there's a couple bosses that are weak to fire, and there's just no way to tell that unless like someone's written a guide on it. And that's a little bit frustrating, but that said, most of the bosses will go down. You just need to memorize their patterns, and most of them are pretty fun and require enough brain power to at least be interesting to fight. Onto the platforming and controls. I saved this because this is a massive section. I know it's not really something you would think about in most adventure games that are kind of Zelda-esque, but people who have played other games from Climax, such as Landstalker or Dark Savior, probably won't be surprised to find that platforming is a critical component, for better or worse, in the Alundra gameplay formula. A lot of the dungeons have moving platforms you need to jump from, spiked balls you need to evade, and just various jumps you need to make. You also sometimes need to throw items, and the world map also has a lot of areas that require precision jumps to ascend terrain. This can be a lot of fun. I love platforming games. I'm such a sucker for them. So even some of the annoying platforming stuff in Alundra, I found actually pretty fun. Like there's one part you need to jump from many different platforms in the water, and if you fall off at all, you end up, it's timed first of all, you got like 3 seconds to jump to each platform, and if you mess up at all, you have to start the whole thing over. I don't know, that was good masochistic fun to me. But that said, this could be the worst aspect of Alundra to most people. I think it is, because it can be really hard to judge terrain height and depth, resulting in a lot of missed jumps and trial and error, and sometimes the game really requires you to stand on an exact pixel to nail the landing. Alright, so what is Alundra's legacy and what is the future of the game? Well, for me, I started this game 25 years ago, could never finish it as a kid, I'll give you the excuse that I just had other stuff to play, but come on, I probably wasn't going to beat this game at that age. So replaying Alundra and finally finishing it has left me with a more sober but still highly optimistic view of the game. The 5th generation of gaming had a ton of amazing action and adventure RPG games, but Alundra really did fill a void for the PS1 for 2D adventure experience, and unless something like Legend of Oasis or Magic Knight Rayearth on the Sega Saturn is more up your alley, Alundra just might be the very best game the genre had to offer that generation. Darker, more focused plot, a less over-the-top script when it comes to humor from working designs, which we didn't talk about much, but yeah, the script here is really well done. There's occasionally an awkward joke, but working designs reeled it in and did a really good job with this script. Moving on to the amazing dungeons and puzzle design, a fun world to explore, all these factors make Alundra an amazing experience to this day. But that said, some of the retro inconveniences and platforming / depth detection woes really make certain points of the game difficult and even maddening for certain players. Add some backtracking within dungeons that would probably not exist today in a semi-sparse save point system, and you have a game that might just be too much for younger gamers or impatient gamers not used to trial and error gameplay and retro sensibilities. Nevertheless, I do encourage anyone interested in the game to try it, and seriously, there is no shame in using a guide when stuck. I did, and it's not so bad to be like me. Well, do not answer that. As far as legacy, that is pretty hard to say. Alundra made a splash at launch, but has always remained a cult classic. It is one of Working Design's best translations, and one of the best games they chose to localize, in my opinion. And the game was as deep and long as anything in the genre. PS3 players were / are, I don't even know if those servers are still up to be honest, able to buy this game on PSN, but like many Working Designs releases, it is very hard to predict when / if this game will ever resurface in the form of a remaster or remake. Alundra is kind of a hidden gem to this day, and while the platforming depth detection woes feel very 90s, the rest of the game, including the darker story, unique concept of entering nightmares, exceptional level design and puzzles, and memorable world make this an unforgettable game for anyone with enough patience and grit to tackle it. So, go try it.
Finally! Alundra, thank you for letting me have a good night of rest. That's it for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Have you played Alundra? Do you like it? Do you think it's the best action RPG / adventure game on the PS1? Please like and subscribe to the video. I know I don't post frequently, but like this game, I'm going for quality over quantity. Alright guys, game on.